I'm James Bennett. I'm a writer of fantasy and horror. Um, I'm the author of the Ben Garston novels from Orbit Books and had short stories out recently in the Book of Queer Saints, the upcoming anthology There's More of Us Than You Know, and the Dark magazine, various other places. And yeah, I've written a novelette for Alistair for his dyslexia-friendly drive. First off, I thought the project was a great one because I'm not dyslexic myself, but as I've told you before, I suffer from dyscalculia, and I was only diagnosed about 3-4 years ago. I've never passed maths. I've never had a grade for maths in my life. Even now, I struggle with figures. I can't carry figures in my head, apart from the basic. So I have a lot of empathy because obviously I love reading, I love writing. So yeah, I thought even though I'm not dyslexic, I can understand the challenges that it would face, and it seemed like a good idea, to broaden the field, make it more open for sufferers of dyslexia. Yeah, I've taught people with dyslexia who don't speak English, which is interesting. And a part of being a teacher is obviously you have to kind of detect that and be encouraging. It's hard enough for students as it is learning another language, let alone having challenges with that as well. So yeah, it's these experiences you have as a young person, obviously help you later in career with a lot of empathy and understanding. So yeah, I felt pretty in a good position to join the project. So I can tell you a lot about it, actually. It's quite an interesting thing because it's not actually my idea. It's one of these obscure things, like the Ben Garston novels. It kind of came out of reading a lot of history and mythology. And I came across this character called the Red Rose Knight. Well, he's called Tom a Lincoln. He's an Arthurian oddity that was written in 2 parts in the late 16th, early 17th century. Johnson was a well-known Elizabethan writer. He did loads of plays and things at the time. He was kind of the equivalent of a best-selling writer at the time, but he's kind of fallen out of, he's not really, we focus on Shakespeare from that era, Shakespeare and, what's his name, Marlowe, and we don't tend to really think, surfacely at least, about the others. And interestingly, he wrote chapbooks, and he wrote sort of adventures about the biblical saints and, the superheroes of the day. And he wrote about the history of Tom Thumb. And he wrote this prose version of the Red Rose Knight, which is not actually, they call it borrowed Arthuriana. What interests me is he's not actually part of the Arthurian cycle at all. He's not part of the original myth. Johnson kind of created him and added him in. And the story itself is kind of obscure chivalric romance. But when you read it, it kind of brings in all these different elements as well. Like, they go to Africa, there's Prester John in there, there's all these other they go to the New World as well. There's all these other elements. And Tom, or Thomas, as I call him in the story, he's a low-born hero. He's a thief, like in my story. And it's kind of like Johnson was kind of controversial because he was getting at the idea of royal, the royal right to rule and God-given nobility, and and the Red Rose Knight is kind of very against that. I don't want to give too much away of the actual story, obviously, because Thomas comes to find out about certain things of who he is and stuff like that, even in the original. But because of that, the Red Rose Knight was regarded by scholars in less than glowing terms. It was seen as misogynistic, because it is pretty misogynistic, the original. It's very critical of nobility, and it's very anti-romantic. It's not very romantic. As Red Rose Knight, probably you can tell from the story, he's not really, given to chivalric ideas. He's very out for himself kind of thing. And that really appealed to me. And I just thought, wouldn't it be great to kind of take these elements, queer it, and reinvent it for now, because he didn't make it through the Victorian romantic revival. He kind of got lost and forgotten about along the way. And I love that kind of thing. That appeals to me. So I thought, well, he'd be interesting to write about. He was very popular at the time, but yeah, just forgotten. So I decided to revive him. And
It's
that's what
really,
I've done.
it's really enjoyable.
Thank you.
It's a good bawdy story, as many people have said already.
Yeah, I wanted to keep the original flavor, but I wanted to tackle the, you know, obviously the problems of the original, if you like, by subverting even that. So now it's not misogynistic, and it's not, you know, all those elements have been kind of turned on their head by queering it, I think. But that's a big question, Alistair. So, this is the subject of an entire panel on Saturday. In a nutshell, it's not, I mean, now is great, let's say. In the past, not so great, just because there haven't been that many outlets or things available, at least in the mainstream. So yes, there's been a very rich underground of, like, you know, queer literature and queer fantasy and all this, but very much kept out of the mainstream because everyone obviously regarded it as verboten and not something they wanted disseminated, not something they wanted their kids reading or young people reading. So all of, you know, you kind of got lost along the way. And in that, there's also a parallel with, you know, dyslexic readers, you know, because I can also understand the exclusion that goes on, even well-meaning exclusion. You know, people tend to think of their own interests and wants, and they don't really think, well, you know. So now it's probably the best time to be a queer writer, I would say, especially in genre, because we're having something of a heyday, you know, and now wherever you look, there's, you know, queer fantasy, and that's very, very good to see and often very moving. Now you go into Waterstone and see a table, and obviously I'm of a certain age, so I literally stand there and look at it and go, for, you know, even 20 years ago, this was unthinkable. I would never have expected to have seen this in my life. I'd never have expected to be submitting, you know, queer themed short stories and novels to leading publishers and them actually taking me seriously. Because in the old times, you'd either be ignored, you get a form rejection, or the bravest would literally tell you that's not going to sell, so I'm not going to publish it. You know, even if they, you know, they knew what you were trying to do, they'd be like, you know, it's not going to, the market is, there is no market, basically. So maybe try these little places that publish like 5 people will read it, but you certainly couldn't think you could have a career off the back of it. So now I see some authors, you know, making waves, and, you know, it's good to see. It's always good to see. A very long, you know, I was the way that I normally describe it is I was a lover of fantasy, horror, and science fiction long before I knew I was gay. So that always kind of comes first in how I kind of tackle things. And, you know, there's a lot of my stuff that is not, it might feature gay characters, but it's not explicitly gay. And, you know, I didn't really have a mind to that. It's only as the market's changed, you know, and I sort of, when I had a mainstream novels out, and I encountered quite a lot of resistance, you know, just to being present. I felt very kind of lonely at times, you know, even this was only like 2017, really. And that kind of built a bit of backbone of saying, well, actually just, there is a space for this. And I said to no end of editors and market, you know, and people, there isn't, I see a growing interest in these kind of stories, and I see a growing need for them amongst LGBTQ and other people, and was opening up. But I didn't feel particularly believed, or rather not believed, trusted. You know, there was no market. So, you know, I've seen that explode, and you just have to take a gamble. So when I kind of came out of that contract, I just decided, right, it doesn't matter anymore, because I've done everything. I've self-published, I've indie published, I've had the mainstream book deal. I've done it all now over 15 years, you know, so I have a kind of good idea of the industry. And now I just want to write what I want to write, you know, and I want to write from the heart, and I want to write about my experience, not my personal experience, but a queer experience within the field of science fiction and horror, and try to kind of create something meaningful, kind of, you know, the same with dyslexic books. You know, it's not just about being gay, it's kind of presenting something from a particular perspective, I suppose. As we know, you know, 99% of the books out there that I've grown up with and that I love very much, but none of them are written from my perspective or a perspective that I relate to. That's what's interesting when you meet people who are resistant to LGBTQ books, because you're like, but I've been reading books that aren't written from my perspective all my life. So it's strange that I can't imagine someone actually being like, no, I don't want that. I must read a book that's only written from my perspective. But that's good to see as well, that now, you know, obviously people further up and editors have kind of become aware of that as well. So I hope that the same thing happens with dyslexia, you know, and I hope the message gets through, someone sees the market for it, and they decide, even though it's different, it's kind of, you know, the same thing, that we need to enrich our literature and make it available to as many people as possible. Because as much as you love reading, you know, there are people out there who, they have a right to have the same pleasure, I think, the right entertainment, you know. Yeah, well, I always give this. I think the industry now is obviously very, very different, and it's very, very different for queer people than it was even like 3 years ago. So advice on that score would change. I would just say, you know, whereas before I'd be like more, you kind of have to keep your eye on the market. I'd say there's new ground opening up all the time, and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to go there now, because it seems that editors and, you know, magazines and publishers are increasingly more open to these kind of ideas. So yeah, be brave, be fearless, always make sure you enjoy what you do, you know, and you can kind of do that by writing from the heart, because if you're writing from the heart, you're invested in it, it's a lot easier, you know. When I've written commercially, it seems a lot harder to do than now. Now it's a breeze, now it's a lot of fun, especially knowing that you're going to get it, maybe someone's going to publish it at the end of the day, whereas rather shove it in a drawer. So yeah, that would be my advice. Yeah, and keep going. That's the third piece. Don't give up. The response for this so far, there will definitely be more Red Rose Night stories, I think.
We're very thankful for you to be part of the project with us. It's been great working with you throughout the whole thing.
Thanks. It's an honor to be a part of it.